This is basically the agenda we want to follow. So a brief introduction from the for the three speakers. I will dive in quickly into sustainability and climate change. We'll dive into the concept and theory of governance risk management. And we'll dive into climate risks, TCFD, and an approach we have designed in order to adhere to TCFD and to work with the climate-related financial disclosures. I'm here together with two other speakers. So my name is Nick de Ruiter, one of the two founders of Sustainalize. I have my colleague Anniek. She will cover most of the climate-related financial disclosure, TCFD part, and the approach she will present to us. And Erik, who will be speaking after me, will be diving into the theory of risk management and governance. Before we start, just some house rules. So please, participants, turn off your cameras and microphones. Rest assured, we will share all the slides afterwards in an aftermail as well. We record the session, so we'll distribute that link as well for you guys listening back, but also to distribute to colleagues and other interested parties. And if you have questions, you can ask them through the chat function. If we have time, we'll answer them in this meeting. Otherwise, we'll come back to that later on offline. As said, what we try to cover today is we bring together three worlds basically. So the world of sustainability, and the world of climate change, which obviously is a part of sustainability, climate change adaptation to be more specific, and the concept and the world of risk management. And that is fairly new and actually accelerated by the Task Force Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and upcoming legislation. So what we try to do today is bring together the world of risk management, sustainability, climate change, because we strongly feel that within organizations, officers from these, say, 3 or 2 blood groups should work together in order to make companies more adaptive to future changes. Before we dive into the contents, for all the participants who not yet know Sustainalize, we're a company, consultancy, helping companies with sustainability, corporate social responsibility. We're around for 10 years now, roughly 40 consultants, over 180 clients, working from 4 offices, Utrecht, Brussels, Cologne, and Melbourne. And what we basically do is we make strategies, we help with performance information, we help with reporting and recognition for a whole range of clients from all different types of sectors. I'm here together with NARIS, and Erik will shortly introduce himself as well, and then we'll dive into the contents.
Yeah, good morning everybody. My name is Erik van Marle, one of the 2 founders of NARIS. NARIS is, we're providing GRC information system for our clients, over 300, both in public and private. Our ultimate goal is to share information between our clients and between our partners and clients to make sure that our clients will learn from each other and learn from their own mistakes in their companies. Yeah, to avoid risks and negative outcome of risk in future. If you look at what we are facilitating, if you look at the financial data, I think that's a really sophisticated area already where companies are reporting over since a long time. What we are focusing on is the GRC data, we call it soft data. And we see that this data is giving relevance to the hard financial data. And our goal is to help our clients to combine these 2 types of data. And what we see that it will help companies to see, to make sure what's the resilience level of our company. Can we prove that we have a good license to operate? Can we give assurance about the quality of controls in our organization? And ultimately, it also says something about the valuation of your company. It becomes more value if you can show these types of control. How do we do that? We see risk as also an ultimate chance. It's not only a threat, but it's also an opportunity. So it gives you more and more information. It gives you more possibility to anticipate on situations. I think the current situation with Corona is a good example of it. More data and the combining of sort of data gives you more assurance about the quality of your controls, and a good reporting system makes sure that everybody knows about it and you can be accountable to the stakeholders you have.
Thank you, Erik, and we'll hear Erik later on when he takes us on board on the theory and concept of risk management and governance. Just a quick heads up on the topic of sustainability. And I saw in the participants many sustainability managers, so this is the time for you guys to get a cup of coffee, and all the people maybe from risk management or want to know more about sustainability, please hold on for 5 minutes while I dive quickly into the concept of sustainability. So sustainability covering many terms, basically: corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship, but roughly speaking, it's the non-financial impacts, opportunities, risks that companies face, basically. And we see obviously the world progressing into more sustainable practices, more sustainable development. And that's an old topic, to be very honest. So it started with the Club of Rome, who said, well, there might probably be limits to the growth. So there will be limits to what we can ask of the world in terms of resources, in terms of emitting CO2. And that's picked up a little bit later by the Brundtland report. And said, well, sustainability is meeting basically the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future. So we need to do something to basically save the world, and this obviously progressed over time, where we know more and more basically of the planetary boundaries of our planet. So topic of climate change, for instance, we cannot keep on consuming as we are consuming now. We cannot keep on emitting CO2 as we're emitting now. Otherwise we have a huge problem, both for mankind but also businesses, obviously. Companies are faced with more and more trends and developments where they need to have an answer for, and this is just a snapshot of elements that impact current business models and companies. And obviously, COVID-19, Corona, could be easily one of the macroeconomic trends impacting the world today, and as such, companies. And climate change obviously is one of the larger one, also being institutionalized in legislation, for instance, EU legislation. We see growing world population, so we need to do with less resources. We need to feed more people, for instance. We need to still have energy and able to heat our homes. While we know climate change is rapidly evolving. We hopefully are keeping it to a 2-degree scenario, but we don't know. Legislation is hoping to keep it at 2-degree scenario, and we see also funds and finance going that way. We also see connections to climate change in the current COVID-19 Corona crisis, where we kind of, with deforestation, for instance, and a strong relation to climate change. So probably we're happy when this crisis is over, but how about climate change? It could be a far greater crisis as well, and it's coming nearer and nearer. We need more natural resources, basically, to feed the mouths of everybody on the world. But then again, climate change can undo the progress we've made the last 50 years. We roughly already need 1.7 Earths to support the annual demand we have now for the ecosystem. And it may seem far away, so 2000, 49 million people being impacted by sea level rise, or an ice-free summer in the Arctic every 10 years. It seems far away. But if you look into some of the events we had recently, it's not so far away. It's very close by, actually. Hurricane damage increasing, for instance, in the US, accumulating to maybe 39 billion at some point in time. Climate change, we're talking about refugees. We have a huge refugee problem already. How about 140 million people trying to move from the different deltas over the world? How about the recent bushfires in Australia? Where did they come from? and the torrential rains after the bushfires, flooding parts of Australia as well. Or the high level rise in Venice or Bangladesh or Thailand, large countries and cities over the world, and the damage they have seen from climate change. More and more research also shows that the risk accumulated with climate change could build up to almost 1 trillion even, where opportunities 2.1 trillion. So this is no pocket money. This is something to work with and something to bear in mind for companies to prepare on. Not surprising, we see climate risk also coming up in current risk management structures, from the 1980s credit risk up to now climate risk. My colleague Anniek will later on dive into the combination of risk management, climate risks, and frameworks such as the TCFD. And now I would like to give the word to Erik to take us on board a little bit on the theory of risk management and governance. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, a little bit background of GRC theory. I think if you look at what Nick has told us, it's one of the types of risk which is relevant for organizations, and it will become more and more relevant. I think the urgency Nick told us is quite clear. GRC, the term stands for governance, risk and compliance. It is becoming more relevant, and you can see that on the governance codes, legislation and frameworks which has been developed over the years. And board and non-executive boards are forced to have a look at these frameworks and to force their organizations to become more transparent over all the types of risks in the risk area organizations are facing. And one of the latest trends you see is that that you have to that the risk audit committee has become a more stronger position to also to become more assured to give more assurance about the quality of the controls you have on all these types of risks. And if you look at risk management specific, I like Kaplan, the founder of the Better Scorecard, and he gives us 3 types of risks, which gives us more insight into different types of control you can use. And looking at these types of risk, you should say you can see external risk. External risks, that are the risks which you can't influence as an organization, as an individual organization. But of course, you can monitor, control the consequences of these risks. And if you look at the types of controls you can add on these types of risks, then you can say, you can do scenario thinking and you can do monitoring. And the monitoring gives you the right moment when you have to act on these types of risks. If you look at the preventable risks, or we also say it are the organizational risks, the operational risks. They arise from within the company. So that are the procedures which are not working in your company. That's the day-to-day work. Most of the companies or most of the people think this is not the highest risk you can have as an organization. I don't think that's not the case, because all stories about in the past learn us that these types of risks can cause a huge image damage to a company. If you don't have your basics in order, then you have really an image problem. Strategic risks that are most of the time that are conscious choices, and you get a strategic return. If you do this right, you get a strategic return for the risks you are taking. A risk is not only a threat, it's also an opportunity. The big question today is, where are the climate change related risks? I don't think it's an external risk, because we know already what's happening, and we know we see the world changing, and we see what's happening in the world. Nick did a great story about this. So it's a preventable risk. You have to organize this, and you have to become prepared to these kinds of risks. And then if you are if you succeed in this, you can also turn it into a strategic return. So you can fit it into your strategy and make sure that you are prepared for it. I believe that the companies who do this best will have a strategic advantage to their competitors. So the opportunity is there in having the best controls in place when these types of risks occur. How do you do that? We have all kinds of risks, HR, strategic, legal, technological, financial, and climate change related risks. What we see in the past that it was only the financial part who had the audience on board level. Nowadays it's all the types of risks. So climate change should be an integrated part of all the types of risks which you are facing. And it should be an integrated consideration. And Anniek will tell us later on how we do this and how you can make sure that as an organization you bring this to one dashboard. Not only the information from inside the company, also the information from outside the company is relevant. And so collecting information, collecting information from situations happening in your organization or outside your organization is becoming more and more relevant to the board, because then you see how healthy your organization is. One of the big changes in the governance codes is that they ask board members to ask for these kinds of incidents, because it gives you a far shorter time frame to know if the organization is really healthy. And of course, at the end of the day, you also should know what's the financial impact of these risks, also the climate change related risks. So you should have the ability to calculate risk and to calculate on different scenarios what the impact is of, in this case, climate change related risk. Not only from a financial perspective, let your board members know where these climate change related risks affect your strategy, because and this is a visual which really helps board members to make an integral consideration where all types of risks are affecting the strategy of your organization. And it gives you a complete overview how you can, which choices you have to make. And again, risk is not only a threat. In this case, we will turn it into an opportunity. Now I will give the word to Anniek, who will go deeper into our approach and how we can help you.
Well, we know that climate change is happening, and we see the risk occurring higher and higher up the risk lists published internationally, and we see governments and society worrying very much about everything that's happening with regard to climate change. So it's very important for organizations also to act upon what's happening and to get prepared for the impact of climate change on their organization and the impact of the organization onto the world. The FSB, Financial Stability Board, played a very important role in that. The Financial Stability Board recognized the impact of climate change on the financial health of organizations and the financial health of our economies. So they initiated a task force on climate-related risk, and especially on the financial disclosures related to that. The TCFD is chaired by Michael Bloomberg and is focusing on those elements required to have insight in the financial impact of climate change on the organizations. I will talk you through briefly on how the TCFD is structured and what it will entail. But what we see now is that TCFD is even followed up by initiatives that really are focusing on the translation of the TCFD requirements or recommendations, because it's voluntary, to make it more concrete, to make it make it possible to implement it for organizations. And that's now done by the CD, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, together with CDP. What we also see is that TCFD is gaining a lot of attention and is becoming more of a standard approach or a standard model used in very many initiatives related to sustainability issues and climate change issues. So we see multiple institutes referring to TCFD as the standard for becoming transparent and becoming more clear on the financial impact of climate change on your organizations. So we see reference to TCFD in the EU taxonomy. We see PRI referring explicitly to TCFD. Within Eumedion, on the governance level, climate change is explicitly identified and referred to TCFD as well. So we see everything is focusing on TCFD. But TCFD, as I already said, is voluntary, but the chances are very big, or the chances will be very high that that legislations and regulations on this topic will get here as very soon. So it's really important for organizations to start on acting and to start investing time to understand the impact of climate change on organizations. So the recommendations of TCFD are clustered in 4 specific elements. First of all, the governance. TCFD states that it's very important for an organization to have a governance in place which assures that climate change related impact, non-financial or financial, is discussed in the proper boards and decision-making units in the organization. So the governance should assure that this topic is discussed on a regular basis on the right level in the organization. The second circle is focusing on strategy. And strategy, or the recommendation, entails that the climate change impact on the organization, negative but also positive, should be reflected in the strategy of the organization. So the governance should enable the organization to make very risk-aware decisions with regard to climate change and reflect that back into the strategy of the organization. Risk management focuses on the use of the existing risk management policies and to make it possible to integrate climate change risk into the risk management for the other types of risks, so that board or management is able to have a proper discussion a proper discussion reflecting all risk types in the organization. The metrics and targets focus on the traceability of risks. What is happening in the risk with regard to the transition risk of the climate change risk, and how can we measure our progress? And that's for one part on are we controlling the risks like we want to do, and to the other side it's also very important to see how you can measure risk in order to be transparent to your stakeholder group who wants to know how you act towards with regard to climate risk. We already discussed that TCFD is not only focusing on the risks, it's also focusing on the opportunities, and getting the insight on the impact of climate change in a broader sense to your organization brings risks as well as opportunities. And this slide shows a few of the potential risk types or risk categories that can happen. And transition risk and fiscal risk are really important distinctions. The fiscal risks is really what is happening to your buildings or your plants or your fleet or your boats or I don't know, your vessels. And the transition risks focus much more on, are you able as an organization to get ready for this new era in which climate change is impacting our daily lives every time. And there are a few possibilities to tackle those challenges in the technology, but also in the reputation of your organization and the way you approach the marketplace. On the opportunity side, there are also a few different elements that you can consider while discussing your strategy and to make the strategy risk or climate change risk aware or aware, so that your strategy fits your risk profile from a climate change perspective. So TCFD also states, okay, we want to know about these financial disclosures. We want to know what the financial impact is on the organization. So all these risks and opportunities can be translated into a financial impact on one side on the income statement and on the other side on the balance sheet, of course. But it all starts with a bit of insight in the actual risk profile. So, what is the added value of the integration of the TCFD recommendations for you, for the organizations? The first very important point is the request of multiple stakeholders to get more insight in the risk profile from climate change. So we see that investors are requesting more and more information on this issue, but that society, and society is a big push as well, because they want to buy from organizations that are responsible towards our planet. So we see that a lot of stakeholders are really in favor of transparency on this topic, and as well, as we already saw for the FSB and TCFD, it's really key for the financial stability to have transparency. So the forecasts are that it will become much more important to get transparency on these topics, to be able to define the financial health of organizations in the future. Another big point another interesting point is the financial buffer that you need to have to cover unforeseen risks. At the moment that you will invest time in understanding what climate change can do to your operations, and that you can take active measures to manage those risks, will enable you to free up some capital to do more interesting things and to lower the financial buffer that you need for the unforeseen risks. Another big part or interesting part is your dependency on other players in your value chain, and that is also something seen in the COVID crisis currently. That the dependency on your suppliers, but also the willingness of your buyers to buy your products is really key and really interesting. And climate change can cause your suppliers to be out of business for some weeks because of floodings or because of no air traffic or whatever. This whole exercise is really interesting also to understand the impact of climate change on your whole value chain and how that can disable or enable you to be successful. And the last but not least advantage would be to be ahead of regulations. As I already said, it's very likely that the regulations will be speeding up pretty fast. So starting off to invest time to understand the impact of climate change on your organization will be very helpful to be effectively and efficiently be able to comply to the regulations. So, in the marketplace, we already saw many organizations acting on climate change for a bit, but also handling or facing a lot of challenges. So these are a few of the questions that we have seen. Climate change has a lot of scenarios. Once it's about weather change, it's about water change, it's about biodiversity, and it differs across all continents, and it's different everywhere. And there's also a very huge insecurity, because we don't know yet what will happen exactly in 50 years' time. So there's a very big complexity also in the difference between short-term risks and very long-term risks. So it's really hard to oversee, and if you don't have the expertise to oversee all those scenarios, it's really hard to act upon. What we also heard is, okay, climate change risk is a new risk type coming into existence now. We are developing, everybody is developing a lot of know-how on this topic, but how can I integrate and make it comparable to my other risks in the organization? How can we do that in a proper way? Another one is, how can we combine risk and opportunity? Normally, opportunity is managed by management, and risks are facilitated by risk management and are controlled in the organization. And on a strategic level, it is opportunity and risk in balance and create a strategy. But how can we do that for climate change? And the diversity of the stakeholder field is also a very interesting part, because you always have stakeholders solely interested in the financial gains, but there are many stakeholder fields that are very interested in other parts as well. So we see that in the development of integrated reporting, that much more information is asked by organizations about the non-financial parts of the organizations. So the sustainability topics as a general come into place, and how can you inform all those stakeholder groups separately and keep them happy? So we have been working on a solution that is needed to address all those questions. And what we did, and this is a slide with a lot of building blocks, but I just want to talk you through briefly on what we did, because we think that will help organizations to start the assessment on climate change risk. So what we did as a baseline is that we started with IPCC-based scenarios for climate change. So the IPCC is the institute that researches the impact of climate change on the different parts of the world in the different areas, so water management, diversity or biodiversity, rising sea levels and the impact on society. So that is the institute delivering the baseline for climate change related scenarios. So based on these scenarios, as we think that those scenarios will come into action at some point, we developed a database of potential risks that face your organization related to that scenario. So the scenario is just some sort of a given, and the database of potential risks considers and consists of the preventable risks that Erik just referred to. So it's a database considering all the scenarios in all the continents of the world, and we developed a full list of potential risks that you can use as a starting point. For this database, we know that it's never finished, because everything is happening and developing at a very fast pace, and there are so many institutes working on more insight on the impact of climate change. So the database is updated constantly to make it better and better and better. For each of these potential risks, we developed model measures as well. So a model measure is an activity that you can do to mitigate the risk or to manage the risk. It's not that you have to do that, it's just an idea of doing or managing that specific risk. So the database consists of a lot of risks and a lot of measures to address, to mitigate the risks. As Sustainalize, we have the expertise at hand to constantly update that risk database, but also to apply it to specific organizations, because all the organizations are different. One is operating in the Netherlands only, and the other one is operating globally and has clients base which is America based and the production base which is Asia based. So every organization is different, and we can apply this approach to all the organizations. Besides the database with the content related to climate change, we also developed an approach. And the approach enables to have a structured assessment of these risks. So we first and I will dive into that later on a little bit deeper, but we will be able to have a proper assessment for your climate change profile. On the right part of the slide, we took up a few elements that tie in climate change towards the other risk types and the further organizational governance of your organization. So the methodology that we use for climate change can be applied to other risk types as well, but we can also integrate both of the assessment methods that you already use for other risk types to the climate change methodology. So that's an integrated part, and then it will be enable you to have a good overview of the full risk profile. As the outer circle of the TCFD framework stated, it's essential to have a good implementation in your organizational governance. You have to tie in this topic in the organizational governance to be sure that it will be discussed and handled on a periodic schedule. So you need to fit it in the cycle that Erik just showed. So these are the building blocks of our solution, and I will talk you through in a sec. But I'm going to talk you through now. This is the high level approach, and I will talk you through in detail in some sort of a walkthrough later on. We start with gaining insight into the relevant scenarios, and that means that we have a full database of potential scenarios, and we will discuss with the organization which scenarios are relevant for them, and that is really depending on your geographical presence. It's very relying on the geographical presence of your suppliers and clients, but it's also very depending on your business activity and the products that you are selling. So together we will have a search on which scenarios in which areas in the world are relevant for you to consider in this risk assessment. Based on those scenarios, we have a full list of risks because those are in the database already, and we can apply those to the organization. So we will just have a read through the risks, and we will select what is relevant, and we will specify and tailor it to fit the risk of your organization. When we have that full list of risks, we will assess the risks, and hopefully we'll identify a few opportunities as well that might be relevant for management to know about. After the risk assessment, we will define how we want to manage those risks and how we can respond to those risks, which activities need to take place to manage the risks so that it's within your risk appetite of the organization. And finally, we will embed it and report it. And embedding means structure or tie it into the usual management cycles and to related to the other risk types. And the reporting is really about keeping those stakeholders happy and also to integrate it in your annual reporting or integrated report. So these are activities that we are planning to do for climate change. But then the question is, who will start this exercise? Because what we see in TCFD, TCFD is referring to management quite often and is stating, okay, management needs to have the governance ready. Management needs to assure that climate change is integrated in the strategy and all the different steps. But will management kick it off? That's the big question. Eh? We see a huge role for the risk and sustainability managers that are participating in our webinar now. We see that you both, as a duo, can be the trigger to facilitate this discussion by starting to have the insight in which scenarios are relevant for you and why is it important for the organization to consider climate change. When you are aligned and have a first view on those relevant scenarios, you involve representatives from business units, the business managers, but also plant managers, because they face the physical risks. but also parties like investor relations, as they know that what the relevance of climate change is for the investors. In this phase, it's also very interesting, as Erik already mentioned, to involve internal audit, because audit and the assurance over the risk profile of the organization in a full wide is very relevant to assess. So internal audit can play an important role in this as well. For the risk managers in the webinar, I have included the first of the 3 lines of defense model in the bottom, because I think it is really important to have the first line included or involved in this exercise extensively. So with all the parties in the dotted line section, you can have a proper assessment on the risk profile for climate change. You can assess, okay, if this scenario is happening to our business in the Americas, what will happen to us? Which physical risks do we face? Which transition risks might be relevant for us? So you can have a proper assessment and have a good view on the risk profile. That would be very interesting for management. So then management comes in, and the board will be very curious about the outcome of the risk profile, so that they can also report to the audit committee about the risk profile on climate change and be able to tie it into all the other risk types and to see how it fits into the strategy. Of course, would it be very nice if management states, okay, I want you to do a climate change risk assessment, but sometimes it's also a bottom-up process to start off these exercises. So that was who is doing what. But what are we going to do? And I just wanted to talk you through the steps that we developed as part of the high-level approach I just showed you, and we made some sort of a pathway to show you. The first step is selected relevant scenarios, and on the left-hand side of the slides you see the scenarios that we identified based on the IPCC research, and for those scenarios we identified the likelihood of happening in the several continents in our world. So there are big differences in the likelihood that wildfires occur in Australia opposite to wildfires in Europe. It's still happening, but it's a different scale. So we have insight in those scenarios, and we can divide between the continents. So the next step is, okay, let's see where you are located and what the characteristics are of the activities in all those places. And based on all that information, so step 1, 2, and 3 together, you can determine, okay, this scenario is relevant for me in this and this and this continent, and multiple scenarios might be not relevant for you given the characteristics of your organization. So this is gaining the insight in the relevant scenarios for your organization. Then apply it to the organization. We saw which scenarios are relevant for your organization, so we selected and we transferred the risks related to those scenarios to one overview of potential risks for your organization based on the expertise that is integrated in the database. And we can just go through and see which of those risks are really relevant for you given the characteristics of your organization. We are able to just delete what is not relevant. We can tailor what is relevant to make it your specific risk overview for climate change. I can imagine that multiple organizations also have an overview of climate change related risks already. So we can have a check if those are in the list already, or that we need to make the additions. But this is not, we can just integrate what is there already, of course. And we can re-perform that assessment for all the scenarios that are selected. So we have a full overview of the scenarios per region and per scenario. Based on that, we go and do an assessment. And we can use the standard methodology that we facilitate in the NARIS tool, and we can also amend and tailor that specific approach to fit the methodology that you are using as in the organization. So we can just integrate the way we assess risks, the climate change assessment, to the assessment of other risks within your organization. In this part, it's also very important to get the right people on board. So the people from the first line, so the business managers, the plant managers, maybe investor relations, and maybe there are other parties or other functions that have relevant insights for the climate change risk profile, are invited in this stage. So the right people involved, we have a list of risks, let's assess those risks. And the assessment method focuses on the identification of the likelihood. We will assess those risks that the scenario that we selected will occur. What is then the likelihood that the risk would happen to us? And we will also decide what the impact will be. And the impact can be measured on strategy, on the execution of the ability to execute on the strategy, on the balance sheet, on the profit and loss, or on the effectiveness of the business model if that risk occurs. So you will get some sort of a heat map, which is a little bit a next level heat map. So the risk managers in this group will think, well, our risk map only has one quadrant. This one has two, and that's true because some of the risks might have a positive impact, and normally in risk assessments we do not see that many positive impacts, but maybe climate change will bring opportunity as well. So this is the outcome of the assessment of risks, and then the next very relevant step is to see, okay, how are we going to manage it, and how are we going to respond to the risks that we have assessed. And there are big differences in here, because those risks which are on top, on the positive impact side, are really relevant to bring to management to see, okay, could this be a strategic opportunity for us? The risks in the middle are more like, okay, we need to monitor the evaluation of the risks, or the evolution of the risks, I mean, but do we need to actively manage those risks? We don't know. And the risks in the bottom are really key to have a proper way of controlling those risks. So implementation of controls can be very useful, and the controls, as I said before, can be based on the model measures that we included in the database already. So based on this assessment, you know how to respond, and then you want to track your response. So you want to track how you are managing the risk and how effective you are in that. So the tool has all kinds of interesting BI opportunities to slice and dice in the information in the tool to enable you to be effective in the way that you are monitoring this risk and measuring the risk. Also to be able to report on it later on. So the last step is the embedding and the reporting on climate change risk and opportunity. First of all, it's really important to not have a standalone system for climate change risk management. It should be integrated in the other ways that risks are, or into the way that other risks are managed. So it should be integrated in the cycles, and it also should be integrated in your management cycle as a whole. This is very important from a governance perspective and also from a timing perspective to keep the topic going. And I think that for this part you can also learn from the risk types that have evolved in the previous 60 years, because the way those are handled and integrated, now it took some time, and it gave us some nice lessons learned, so you can also see how they did it and then integrate it in your cycle. Then also from a governance perspective, it's very important to define the roles and responsibilities with regard to who's owning risks and who's owning controls, but also in a broader sense, who is managing the risks and who is triggering the processes. So this whole process is supported by the NARIS tooling and is very helpful in getting that governance really working. And last but not least is the reporting. TCFD is asking for financial disclosures on the impact of climate change. So it is very, if you did all the work to see what your risk profile is and to see how you could manage the risk, it's really beneficial that you are able to report about it as well. NARIS provides all kinds of slice and dice opportunities to create reports with the BI function in NARIS. And it's also very important to integrate all the 4 elements of the TCFD framework in your integrated reporting and to explain what you did, how you did it, and what the results are for the organization. So that enables to inform your stakeholder field about all the activities that you are undertaking for climate change risk. These are the steps of the process. I will hand over the clicker again to Nick.
Yeah, thanks Anniek, thanks Erik, thanks for all the information, thanks you guys for listening. We got some questions, and while Anniek was presenting, I was able to answer most of them. If you have more, just put them in the chat box, and we can go on answering your questions offline. So the what we call the hamvraag or the bacon question is perhaps when should I start? Probably to go beyond compliance, I guess, to be at the forefront before compliance will kick in. For instance, with the EU taxonomy. To keep your investors and stakeholders happy. We see more and more questions, CDP, APG asking for TCFD. If you're interested, obviously, in the insight and risks and opportunities coming from climate change, and they can be huge. We already showed this. That's a starting point. And as Anniek already explained, the ability to lower the financial buffers for unforeseen risks, such as Corona, COVID, but also climate change could be one of this. Just wrapping up, and I already said it in the beginning, but we understood that some of you were able to attend slightly later, but we'll share the presentation with you, all slides. We have recorded the whole webinar. We'll share the link with you as well. So that will be distributed in an aftermail. We will be organizing a new webinar as well, where we dive slightly deeper for those of you who are interested in the tool and the concept of the scenario analysis. If there are already interested potential clients out there, we are accepting a first wave of clients who can work with us on the tool. We have competitive rates for that, launching customer rates to start working with climate-related financial disclosures and the tooling. Please reach out to either one of us, myself, Anniek, or Erik. And as said, I think we're right in time, 4 minutes before finishing line. So I would like to thank everybody for attending. If you have any questions, reach out to us, and hope to see you soon, maybe live, maybe through a webinar. Thanks.